The war in Syria as Aleppo is bombarded with airstrikes. Can the recently broken ceasefire be restored? And is there any hope for future peace talks? The United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, joins me from the UN. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. This is The Heat. The war in Syria took another deadly turn on Friday as new attacks were launched on the city of Aleppo. Dozens are reported killed in airstrikes after the Syrian government announced an offensive to retake areas of the city controlled by rebels. It's another major setback for the country following a ceasefire put together by Russia and the United States earlier this month. But the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, says the ceasefire needs to be revitalized, and he's even hopeful on the future of peace talks. I talked with him earlier today. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Peace appears to be very elusive in Syria right now. That ceasefire that was brokered by the United States and Russia has fallen apart, and we are hearing right now reports coming out of Syria that the government has launched a new offensive to retake rebel-held areas around the city of Aleppo. What is the status of the ceasefire right now? Can it be salvaged?
Yes, it can, and frankly, must be salvaged. The alternative is just a complete and total warfare in Syria, and Syria has seen that for 5 years with 400,000 people killed. Now, the ceasefire agreed on the 9th of September between the Russian Federation and the Americans has not been declared dead by them, and they are the only ones who can do so. What we do see is that it is in great danger of collapsing completely and needs to be revitalized. Otherwise, we will have just war, and the Syrians don't need that.
How difficult is it to implement a ceasefire of this kind? Because there's no kind of enforcement mechanism that will hold parties responsible for breaking that ceasefire accountable.
You have a very good point there. So that's why if we had the ceasefire starting, I would not be surprised that we would be seeing also a Security Council resolution related to the ceasefire. But it needs to be given a chance. That's why these famous 7 days were so important and are important in order to show that there is a genuine intention and capability of ensuring that the ceasefire is going to be held.
Now, you are in continuous negotiations on efforts to find peace in Syria right now. You've been meeting with the Secretary General at the UN, Ban Ki-moon. He has called on the Security Council to give its support to your efforts. What are the latest efforts that you are making right now?
Well, first of all, let's say first things first. And the first thing is to help both Russia and the US, and with the help of the regional players, that the cessation of hostility, or ceasefire, or reduction of violence at least, takes place. Second, that humanitarian aid moves. Don't forget, that's what the Syrian people are asking. If we mean what we say, that it is, we are supposed to listen and to help the Syrian people, they're asking for that. We don't want bombs, we want more trucks, more aid. And at the same time, clarify the issue which has been ambiguous regarding al-Nusra and the rest of the armed opposition, and grounding then the Syrian Air Force, which means there would be no more barrel bombs. All that would be very positive when and if implemented in order to launch, without preconditions, but still much positive if it did take place, in order to relaunch the intra-Syrian talks.
You raise an important point there, talking about al-Nusra. There are believed to be something like 1,000 armed groups in Syria. The total number of fighters are believed to be in the region of about 100,000. They are not all at the table. How do you get everyone to abide by any kind of agreement?
Well, let's look at facts. You remember 26th of February, when in fact Russia and America did agree and were able, through the ISSG, to engage all the sponsors or the countries engaged or involved or supporting one side or the other to actually agree to it. And we had 2 months, basically, of no fighting. And the government did not fly and didn't bomb, and the other side didn't do the same. So it's possible there is a need of a political will. And I think the fact that the Russians and Americans have not declared yet, and I hope they will not, that the ceasefire agreement they have made is dead, shows that they are still working until the last moment in order to revitalize it. I tell you again, the alternative is just war. And by the way, taking over Aleppo doesn't mean being able to hold it, doesn't mean that you win the war. You need still to actually find a political solution.
And looking for that political solution, what are the prospects for direct talks between the two sides?
In my opinion, not only they are good, but they are indispensable. We have already had proximity talks now 3 times. They were useful because they helped the various sides to be able to express to us, without having them to meet or actually to fight verbally between them, their own positions. We know them by now. We know also their own vision. There is a point when you need to negotiate. Negotiate means compromise as well, means being able to talk to each other and eventually even make concessions.
Now, there have been meetings at the UN General Assembly going on all week. Has there anything come out of these meetings that gives you hope that some progress will be made?
Yes, because all the meetings I've been attending, and we are still attending them, are clearly indicating that none of the countries who have an influence or who are sponsoring or supporting one side or the other even dream that there is a possibility of a military solution. They may be wanting to be in a better position at the time of the negotiation, but no solution on a military nature. That is an important point, which means that regardless of what we are seeing, at the end of the day, there will be a need of a serious discussion, and a serious discussion about what had been agreed already in the UN Security Council resolution 2254, is a roadmap.
Now, you have major players like the United States and Russia, which are leading efforts to find peace in Syria. What about regional countries like Iran? What role can they play?
They are very important, and they need to be engaged. And we want to engage them all the time. But of course, if the ISSG, which is this, the contact group made of more than 20 countries, is including all the regional players, that means Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, Oman, Emirates, and many other countries who are involved in Syria or in Iraq, and Iraq is actually there too, the beginning of a possible deal would be facilitated if Russia and America would agree, and then share it through us or directly with everyone else so that they can contribute to it. That's basically what we need to see more often.
Looking at all the steps that have to be taken to implement some kind of peace deal, the benchmarks, if you like, do you believe that groups like ISIS would have to be defeated first before there can be some kind of deal?
First of all, let me add one the important country that I take for granted to be mentioned, because they are members of the P5 and they're being actively involved in supporting our mission. I can only thank the strong support I've been getting from China in order to try to find a political solution. All their contributions have been very reasonable and very logical in terms of giving the chance to the Syrian people to decide on their own future, for instance, which is exactly what we are trying to do. Now, going back to Daesh, which is a common enemy of everyone, including China, they are taking advantage, like Ebola basically, of any weakness of a body. And they take advantage of the fact that at the moment, many players have different agendas, while all of them, in theory, should have one agenda as well, defeating Daesh. But fighting Daesh is possible, and they are doing it in one form or the other. Winning it, and here comes the point, winning it requires much more. Requires actually a political solution which includes all those who feel not included in the political environment of Syria. That is the challenge, and that's why we are talking about, yes, fighting Daesh, but to win, we need a political solution which is leading to a political transition. Basically, again, resolution 2254.
You know, you have been called the man with the toughest job in the world. This appears to be an intractable problem. We just heard from the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, this week. During an interview, he said that when you have many external factors that you do not control, it's going to drag on. He's talking about the war there. And no one in this world can tell you when the war will end. He doesn't sound very optimistic.
No, but I'm more optimistic than him. I believe instead that the regional players, and certainly Russia and America, and frankly China has always been on that line, this war has gone too far and too long and needs to be stopped. No one is winning. The only ones who are losing are the Syrian people. So I believe that we are not far, but there is a need for a political will. And that's why this cessation of hostilities, which was agreed upon between Russia and America, and was supported by everyone in the region, needs to be revitalized.
You know, the United States and Russia may have differences on a number of issues, but on this issue they seem to be moving in the right, or at least in the same direction. How important is US-Russian collaboration in bringing an end to this war?
Very important. One, because they do have an influence. Certainly, Russia has a substantial influence on the government of Syria. And on other regional players, they are an important player who are now involved militarily and therefore have assets on the ground, plus have major interests. They don't want the terrorism to reach themselves. The US has a very strong priority in trying to, one, make sure that, again, Daesh does not expand its own influence and capabilities. B, to find a political solution to a tragedy, a humanitarian tragedy, which is the biggest tragedy since Second World War. And that is part of the legacy of President Obama, to want to make sure that he at least can say he tried everything he can. Right. When they agree, like on the 26th of February, everyone else is actually induced to at least not oppose it. And that's important.
You talk about the humanitarian tragedy. What about the plight of massive numbers of people who've been displaced inside Syria? Millions of people have been forced to leave the country. What does the future hold for them?
If you knew the Syrian people, you would know how proud they are of their country and of their own culture and tradition, and how much they love their own country. And they don't want to be refugees. They don't want to be displaced. They actually want to stay or come back. But we need at least to help them to avoid to see that their country is being destroyed.
Mr. Staffan de Mistura, thank you for joining us, sir.